Neoliberalism is the status quo and is the most successful Western political ideology, but it's been failing recently, which allows ideologues like myself to radicalize others towards my very specific political ideology. Neoliberalism is an economically right-wing ideology. It basically states that capitalism and the free market should be allowed to run the world. However, ostensibly, it's not really economically right-wing. Depending on who you ask, it's more of a corporatist ideology that favors big businesses over small businesses and doesn't actually facilitate free trade. Neoliberalism tends to be socially left-wing because if you're not infringing on anybody else's rights, then you can basically do whatever you want as long as it's within the privacy of your own private property. And you're not bothering others too much. Then there's the state arm of neoliberalism, which is a police force that enforces the law. Social liberalism, neoconservatism, civic nationalism, social democracy, basically every other centrist ideology, that's all neoliberalism. Technically, there are differences between, say, a neoliberal and a classical liberal or a liberal conservative or what have you, but as extremists, it's our job to just call everything we don't like neoliberalism or centrism or something along those lines and just move on with our lives, okay? I don't care what the difference between social democracy and neoliberalism is. If a social democrat says, well, actually, I'm more economically left-wing than a neoliberal, just say lib, and eventually they'll run off and reconsider their bad life choices. Technocracy is a wacky authoritarian ideology in which a group of unelected technocrats runs the world. Oh, oops, we're still in the centrist status quo ideologies. Let's keep moving. Progressivism is a socially left-wing ideology which essentially states that more kinds of people deserve more kinds of rights. It's economically variable, it's variable in terms of, you know, the state versus anarchy. Some people say anarchy is the best way to achieve progressivism. Some people say that having a strong state is the best way to achieve progressivism. Progressivism as an ideology in this form just means progressivism in the broad sense. Libertarian socialists go one step further with progressivism and say it's not just enough to be progressive, you also have to be anti-capitalist and anti-state, because both of those things are oppressive and standing in the way of progressivism. Anarchism is a broad philosophical, theoretical, political framework that basically has a bunch of different offshoots. There's like 30 different offshoots of anarchism, but they're all held together with the broad general idea that there is an unjust hierarchy called the state, and you need to dismantle the state in order to achieve some kind of political goal. Because the state is unjust or bad in some way. So all these ideologies are essentially unified in being against a state, a strong central authority. National anarchism is against a strong central authority, but is culturally right-wing. And what that means is they want a place where there is no strong central authority, there's no strong leader that binds everybody together, but everybody there is ethnically, culturally homogenous in some way. They're either all the same race or they all have the same cultural values or something along those lines, so that they all get along. That the belief of national anarchism is you can't really just have a random anarchist commune. You need to have some sort of cultural union between the anarchists within that commune. Anarcho-feminism looks at anarchy through a uniquely feminist lens and views the state as an extension of patriarchy. So in order to free women from the oppression of men, it is necessary to dismantle the state, and of course dismantle patriarchy, because the state is an extension of patriarchy. Anarcho-feminists, they get a bad rap these days because they're often called TERFs, and they're sort of overshadowed by queer feminists. Anarcho-Pacifism is a specifically non-violent variant of anarchy, basically just stating the state is violence and we don't like the state, but we're not going to use violence against the state. They favor stuff that's more along the lines of peaceful protests and, signing petitions and stuff. Good luck, buddies. Anarcho-primitivism wants to dismantle the state and return to a state of humanity. Depending on who you ask, some anarcho-primitivists want to go before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Some of them want to go even further than that and go before we even had stuff like agriculture and had any kind of cities at all. So there are varying degrees of anarcho-primitivist, but all of them agree that staring at your phone 16 hours a day is not how man was meant to live. I don't understand it myself personally. Deep Ecology they look at humans and their dominion over nature, and they view that relationship as inherently oppressive to nature. So deep ecologists, they want to liberate nature, and they view the main struggle as being between man and nature, and they think people should just leave nature alone and let it do its thing. Sometimes they're fairly anti-humanist. Transhumanists, they want to use technology to enhance human desire, to minimize human suffering. You see a lot of transhumanists who want to, like, abolish death, you know? They want to, like, live for extremely long amounts of time, and they basically want to use technology to enhance the human experience. This is in contrast, by the way, to posthumanists. Posthumanists, they want to accelerate technology to the point where humans aren't needed anymore. They view the inevitable progress of sentient life towards something along the lines of a computer that replicates itself to the point where we are simply not needed. If you ask me, I think posthumanism is a more likely future than transhumanism, but that's not important. Fascism is a... it's difficult to describe. I would describe it with two main variables. One, it's ultra-nationalistic, so it's not just enough that they are nationalists, right? They are ultra-nationalistic. They have closed their borders, and it's not just that they're not letting anybody in, but they're also actively purging an out-group. So fascists typically need an out-group. They're typically defined through having some kind of conflict or war, but that's not necessary. And there typically is some sort of rebirth narrative that's going on. So, you know, where while a conservative might say, 30 years ago things were great, a fascist might say 300 years ago, things were great. Like that's the extent. So very far culturally right-wing, very, very nationalistic. Those two traits, I would say, sort of make a fascist a fascist. They're typically described as third positionist, an alternative from socialism and capitalism. The third position is above both of those ways of looking at the world, although nowadays there's so many different spectrums, that's not really a unique observation. Third position, there's like fifth position, you're in the past if you're still thinking like that. Theocracy is basically just the idea that a theocrat, someone who believes in a specific religion, should be running society. So if you're for example a Catholic theocrat, you would like the Pope to run society, or someone who's in communing with the Pope, some Pope equivalent. Same thing with Islamic theocracy, Buddhist theocracy, Hindu theocracy, Christian theocracy. All that kind of stuff is in the same general ballpark. If you're an Islamic theocrat, for example, your politics are your religion, essentially. They're combined. They're like this. Clerical fascism uses theocracy to enact fascism, justify fascism. So if you wanted to be a clerical fascist, then you would basically use, for example, Christian ideology or maybe Islamic ideology to run a fascist state, or to justify a fascist state. So you sometimes see like priests who are like really fascist, doing fascist stuff and using some sort of religion in order to justify it, and those are clerical fascists. Rest in peace, our clerical fascism. I don't know why I said that, because I can't take it back. I'm doing this in one take. Constitutional monarchy is just the idea that a monarch needs to have some sort of constitution that holds back their power, but other than that, you have a monarchy, you have a royal family. The Queen of England is a constitutional monarch, as far as I understand. That, by the way, is in contrast to an absolute monarch who doesn't have any sort of constitution holding them back. I think Louis XV, something along those lines, he said, "I am the state. I am, like, there is no state, I am the state." That kind of idea, like, just complete power. He can do whatever he wants. A dead ideology, to be sure, but there are some neo-monarchs, living still and hoping to revive their ideology. Maybe one day. Eco-fascists use fascist rhetoric to justify, like, saving trees and stuff. Essentially the logic is just like, there are outgroups that threaten our natural resources, our natural land, and the best way to protect that land is to keep out the outgroup, attack the outgroup, etc. Esoteric fascists use spiritual language and stuff like that to justify being fascist. So whenever someone talks to like the soul of a race fighting the souls of other races, it's pretty esoteric. Also, they co-opt all this pagan imagery. Got an email from this pagan guy who was like, "Why are you using pagan imagery when you portray the fascist?" And I'm like, "Ooh, that's not my fault. You've got a bone to pick with a different group than me, because I'm just portraying what I see." And yeah, there's lots of co-opting of pagan imagery. Julius Evola, esoteric fascist. Some say Hitler was an esoteric fascist. I won't get too into it. I don't know that much. Homo Fascism is, I've heard it interpreted in 3 ways, and I'm gonna give you all 3 interpretations. One is of when a boomer sees that like gay people can get married, and they're like, this is fascism. It's 2 is when a gay person wants to create an LGBT ethno-state, or maybe just a gay ethno-state, where everybody there is gay, and everybody within that nation is gay, and you gotta keep out the straights. Essentially, the straight is the out-group in Homo Fascism. That's the second way to interpret it. Third way to interpret it, this is the way I interpret it, it's just the idea that you don't have to be straight to be a fascist. You can be a gay fascist, for example. Ernst Röhm was a famous gay Nazi, for example. Integralism is a third positionist Brazilian ideology. Essentially, Brazilian clerical fascism with a Catholic bent. So, Catholic clerical fascism in Brazil. I think that's the best way to describe it. National Socialism, they're Nazis, okay? I don't think I have to explain that. Zionism, oh, that's weird. It's in the same general location as the last one I said. Conservatism is socially right-wing ideology. They are essentially in contrast to progressives for the most part. So progressive will want to change X, Y, and Z, and the conservative will want to preserve X, Y, and Z, and the conservative will end up conserving Y and Z, and the progressive will end up advancing X. And that's kind of the march of history. Like, the conservative just tries to hold on to certain values, and the progressive is like, yeah, let's move this, let's move this, let's move this. Eco-conservatives, like I said before, the desire to preserve nature is not necessarily a left-wing versus right-wing divide. Eco-conservatives are sort of like eco-fascist light. Authoritarian capitalism is when the state works in tandem with capitalism to produce this ruthlessly effective version of capitalism that functions with the state and just destroys all the liberal variants of capitalism. You might think, oh, that sounds a lot like China. Don't be absurd, you revisionist, okay? That's socialism with Chinese characteristics, and I won't hear it any other way. There were some Dengist reforms, but we're Maoists at heart, okay? Pinochet was sort of an authoritarian capitalism. He used authoritarian practices to facilitate free market capitalism, so you could sort of interpret it like that. Imperialism is the final stage of capitalism, Lenin. You got it. You figured it out, Lenin. This decade, capitalism eats itself. It eats itself into nothing, and communism rises, Lenin. Keep hoping. Corporatocracy. I'm sorry, Lenin. Corporatocracy is just the idea that corporations are best suited to run society. You can actually look at, people really like the idea of guilds, like guild socialism back in the day, and it's sort of like the idea that corporations, guilds, unions, all that general idea is just like a group of workers who are really good at doing something should have political power. And then there's different interpretations of that, like syndicalism, communism, corporatocracy, all those different variants. Monarchy is a broad theoretical framework for just having a guy in charge. Again, a dead ideology. National capitalism is culturally right-wing version of authoritarian capitalism, so it is economically right-wing, it is a statist ideology, and it is economically right-wing and socially right-wing. So basically the opposite of most anarcho-communists. Neoconservatives stand in contrast to paleo-conservatives. as being very interventionist. They like to establish a military presence across the world. They like investing in military. They like fueling a military-industrial complex because they view the fueling of the industrial complex as a way of maintaining dominance throughout the globe. So the reason that they're imperialist, the reason that they're, I said imperialist. The reason that they're internationalist is simply because they want to make sure that none of these uppity third world countries rise and get nukes and start threatening everybody. So they want to sort of keep checks on everything. Paleoconservatives stand in contrast to that. They're more isolationist. It's not because they're like, oh, it's so sad what we're doing to the kids in Yemen. They just don't give a fuck about Yemen, so they don't want to spend their tax money on Yemen. They're more focused with domestic issues than stuff that's happening abroad. They like closing their borders. Most of them are anti-immigrant, like even legal immigrant. A neocon, for example, would be pro-immigration for the most part, as long as it's legal. As long as they come here legally. Paleocons, they don't even want you to come here legally. They are typically associated with fascist movements as well, just because there's a lot of overlap between fascist belief and paleo-conservative beliefs. Hey guys, it's me, paleo-conservative. And it's just like a Nazi. Conservative socialism is a economically left-wing but socially right-wing ideology. So think about a conservative who has like socially conservative beliefs, but economically they have more like socialist beliefs. So like they want redistribution of wealth, but only for a certain group of people who prove themselves as being ethnically or culturally or whatever, what have you, worthy of the redistribution. And then if you take that to the extreme, you get a Nazbol who essentially wants, a national Bolshevik. They essentially want to seize the means of production within an ethno-state. That's the logical extreme of socially right-wing, culturally right-wing, but economically far left-wing. Distributism is just an idea. It's not, so what's important, okay, so distributism, imagine not being a Chestertonian distributist. Distributism is it's very difficult to describe it as being economically left-wing or right-wing. It's got a lot more to do with Christian teachings. It's a Catholic ideology, I think. I think Catholic. It's based off of Catholic teachings, Christian teachings, but you don't have to be a Christian to believe it. And it basically just states if everybody has a little plot of land and a farm and a family, it's very family-oriented, then everything will be fine. So in this way, it's sort of like culturally little right-wing, with all the focus it has on like a traditional family unit. But then economically, it's very hard to describe. It defines itself as neither socialist nor capitalist, like a third position, but for the economy. Longism is similar to that as well, in the sense that longists wouldn't call themselves communists or capitalists. They would view themselves as neither. Huey Long Dong Long was a dude who basically just like he used like fascist authoritarian tactics to like get in power, but then once he was in power, he just did like harmless shit and everybody really liked him. He bought all the school kids like books and stuff, like pretty inoffensive stuff. Juche is ostensibly the political ideology of North Korea. Left communism, left comms they're people who sit in armchairs and they read theory and they criticize. And that's all I gotta say about that. Left-wing nationalists, nationalism isn't necessarily a right-wing ideology. You can be nationalistic, but you can have left-wing beliefs. Left-wing nationalists are often, they're economically left-wing, but they're pro-whatever nation they happen to be a part of. Marxist-Leninism, they take ice pick and they put it into Trotskyism's head, and that's all I gotta say about that. Monarcho Socialism is when Stalin puts on a crown. National Syndicalism. So syndicalism being the precursor to more Marxist leftism. Basically what I was saying before about anarcho-syndicalism, where you have this international union of unions. National syndicalism wants the workers to control everything, but they only want to do that within a nation. So that tends to make them more nationalistic. but also more economically left-wing. Orthodox Marxism. Marxism tends to ideologically, theoretically, get tacked on with a bunch of other different political ideologies. So you'll find like Marxist-Leninists, or Marxist-Leninist Maoists, or Marxist-Hoxheists, Pasadists. But Orthodox Marxists, they just really want to focus on what Marx's original orthodox teachings were. Paternalistic conservatism is more of a big daddy government sort of deal, where you need the government to step in and make sure the kids aren't, doing drugs and stuff like that. Pasadism is communism, but to get communism, you first nuke the planet, and from the ashes will arise communism. It's since gone on to adopt sort of a broader theoretical framework where you can be like a pseudo-capitalist and say, okay, after the nuclear war, it'll be capitalism, not communism, that rises from the ashes. Socialism is again a broad theoretical framework. It can mean it can go in a bunch of different directions, but all those directions are some sort of anti-capitalist ideology. They tend to oppose capitalism. A Marxist-Leninist views socialism as a transitory phase, while a socialist views socialism as the end result. Strasserism is more of an economically left-wing Nazi ideology. They were purged by Hitler along with Ernst Röhm, but it's okay, Strasser, your legacy lives on. Democratic socialism is a more extreme version of social democracy. They basically say that you can achieve a socialist utopia by working within the confines of liberal democracy. So they want to achieve socialism through liberal democracy instead of, for example, a Marxist-Leninist would probably be more revolutionary than that. Environmentalism is just pro-environment. It's variable in literally every other spectrum, not necessarily economically left-wing or right-wing, socially left-wing or right-wing, anything along those lines. Market socialists like the idea of markets, but they don't like capitalism. So they'll talk to you at length about why capitalism is bad, but markets are good. Same thing with market anarchists. Anarcho-nihilists, they are a form of post-left anarchists. So post-left anarchists, they're typically people who reject traditional leftist notions of anarchy. For example, anarcho-nihilists, they would say, okay, well, the reason you're a leftist is because you believe all humans have inherent value, inherent worth, and that, progressing towards socialism and communism, that's the right thing to do. But anarcho-nihilists reject on a first principles basis stuff like humans have rights and there is some kind of intrinsic meaning to what we're fighting for. And they're like, well, if nothing matters, then we may as well tear down the state because I don't like it. But they're going to be very violent while doing so because they don't believe in human rights, essentially. Like, they don't think there's any inherent, intrinsic value to a human. And that's because their whole ideology is based around the Russian nihilist movement. So look into that more if you want. They're a pretty cool ideology. I give them a hard time because nihilism is often used as an excuse to not care about politics, but anarcho-nihilists, objectively, pretty based. Georgists, they basically don't want landlords to have rights. That's it. Geo-libertarians is just libertarianism. You have a free market, except you can't be a landlord because fuck landlords. Mutualism is another one of those ideologies that's hard to explain. Basically, the Centrism of Anarchy. They have all these weird beliefs, like if you leave your house alone, then you should be like that house should be repurposed. You shouldn't be having like absentee land. It's basically an ideology focused around like making sure that when you leave your house alone, someone gets to use it. So there's no wasted land. It's kind of similar to Georgism in that respect. And they want to abolish, they don't like capitalism, but they like markets in the same way as a market socialist. Religious anarchism, you see some old pictures of like Jesus was a syndicalist and he's got like a hammer, and he's like working for the people. Religious anarchy basically says the hierarchy, the only justified hierarchy, and this is like classic anarchist shit, there is only one justified hierarchy, and it is the hierarchy between God and his people. and every other hierarchy, capitalism, all the other hierarchies, the state, those are all unjust. But God ruling his people, that's good. So that's the general gist of religious anarchy. It's obviously more specific depending on which specific religion we're talking about. Social liberalism are liberals, are libertarians. So social libertarianism, I should say. They're libertarians who, instead of wanting free market capitalism exactly, they don't want, foreign wars and all that stuff, but they do want a welfare state, essentially. So everyone's paying taxes, but really the only thing your taxes are doing, instead of border security or whatever, you're basically just forming a welfare state for the people who are within your society. Agorism is basically just when you want to buy guns off the black market and you turn that into a political ideology. Anarcho-Capitalism wants to abolish the state, but keep capitalism exactly the same. They don't view capitalism as unjust in any way, and they actually think that through capitalism, you can achieve the freest possible society for the most amount of people. Anarcho Monarchy. J.R.R. Tolkien was a self-proclaimed anarcho-monarchist. Everybody has a different interpretation of what anarcho-monarchy is. If you can view it as you can choose which monarch you want to follow. I like to imagine this buff dude walking through an anarchist wasteland, slaying people left and right who are trying to form a government to end the anarchy. But the guy just comes in and slices them down. Everybody loves him. Whenever he shows up, everyone cheers, like Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. That's not a good example. Why did I bring up cape shit? Green libertarianism is environmentally focused libertarianism. Paleo-libertarianism is culturally right-wing focused libertarianism. So essentially, you have homogeneity within an anarcho-capitalist sort of society. Hoppianism is the extreme version of paleo-libertarianism, and essentially it tends to be culturally right-wing. It's a culturally right-wing anarcho-capitalist ideology. So they're capitalist, but they're also culturally right-wing. They have essentially the belief that you can be racist through capitalism. So if you don't want to live next to a black person or a gay person, you can just use your corporation to price them out. So just charge them more. If you don't want to live next to blacks, charge a black person 1,000% more than you would charge a white person, and eventually the black people will have to be forced to peaceably relocate. That's Hoppianism. Libertarianism is just the general ideology of less government. They tend to be more pro-capitalist. Minarchism is when you want anarchy in Minecraft. It's actually called Minarchism. It's when you want the minimum possible amount of state. More of a night watchman state is what they would call it. Pink capitalism is culturally left-wing, but economically right-wing. They view capitalism as the way to liberate queers and gays and bisexuals, trans people. The best way to do that is by making them rich. And honestly, they're doing pretty good if you look at the current state of things. Arguably, I shouldn't have. That's maybe not true. Capitalism, free trade is the ideal. Although market anarchists say they don't like capitalism. Everyone has a different definition of capitalism. It's not worth getting into. Feudalism is when you have feudal lords rule the world. A dead ideology. There was one feudal place in 2008, I think, but it's gone now. Mercantilism, another dead ideology. Basically, just exploit your colonies and sell them shit, and then make them spend a bunch of money on it. Accelerationism includes left accelerationists, right accelerationists, unconditional accelerationists, gender accelerationists, but basically, again, broad theoretical framework where you want to go very fast. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Agrarianism is when everybody becomes a farmer, and that's pretty much it. The only thing left is primalism, which is the extension of anarcho-primitivism, except instead of just abolishing all technology, humans revert into just being monkeys again. And anti-centrism. I was going to do more, but my camera's going to die, and I only had 30 minutes to do this whole speed run. So Those are all the important ones. I didn't miss any unimportant ones. I was just gonna meander about unimportant ideologies. The last and most important one is anti-centrism, of course. It's just the idea that whatever the status quo is needs to be opposed. So if the status quo was, not neoliberalism, we would still oppose whatever the status quo was, just because of needless contrarianism. And that is every single political ideology, more or less. I haven't covered them all. There's some really niche ones that aren't important. My camera has 2 seconds left. Bye. Supermarket of ideologies. There's a sale on aisle 3. Find a few that fit you nicely. I've got the best ones. Buy them from me. Politics is just a silly game like Pokemon. Come on, don't be lame. Pick a few to see the world through and fight your friends till they see it too. The schizophrenization of identity inevitably bleeds ideology. There's 1,000 options, all of them seem the same. I just wanna pick the option that's easiest for my brain. You can fight against it, but the flow don't stop. Yeah, I'm working on a plush. Just wait till it drops. Supermarket of ideologies. There's a sale on aisle 3. I've got the best ones, just buy them from me. And find a few that fit you nicely.